Lauren was awoken in the middle of the night to an unsettling silence, a creeping suspicion that something was amiss. The room was illuminated by the gentle shadows cast by the faint glow of the bedside lamp, which rendered everything in muted tones. She shook slightly, her eyes still hazy from slumber. However, the distinct presence of an individual standing at the foot of her bed jolted her wide awake. She observed it after blinking several times to confirm that she was not hallucinating. A tall and slender figure standing motionless as if anticipating her attention. "Michael," she called softly, her voice hoarse from the sudden interruption of her slumber. There was no response, only an unsettling silence that persisted for an excessive amount of time. Her heartbeat increased and her hand instinctively grasped the blanket's edge. The figure took a small step forward, allowing the dim light to illumine a portion of her face. Michael was not the individual in question. These eyes, which were cold, blue, and brimming with an unsettling combination of perplexity and something darker, caused Lauren to freeze in her tracks. "Ethan!" She expelled a gasp, a mixture of fear and astonishment. He stood there, gazing at her in silence and without movement. Lauren's body was suddenly tense, and her mind was racing as every fiber in her body urged her to be cautious. She sat up suddenly. "What are you doing in this location? In the midst of the night, why are you standing in my room?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably as if he were attempting to generate an answer. He stated, "I simply wanted to ensure that you were in good health," his voice quivering and low. However, there was something unnatural about the manner in which he articulated it. Lauren could detect it in the coldness of his words and the manner in which his gaze diverted from hers before returning. She maintained a distance between them by standing. She maintained a measured yet firm demeanor. "All right. Ethan, you entered my chamber without my permission while I was asleep. Are you aware of the inadequacy of this?" Ethan did not respond. He remained motionless, gazing at her with an expression that was impossible to interpret. It was as though he was attempting to discern something about her that she was unable to comprehend. Every second that passed, the air in the room became increasingly oppressive. Lauren's thorax contracted as she endeavored to preserve her composure. "Ethan, I require your departure." She stated that her voice was especially piercing at this moment. This time he moved, but instead of proceeding toward the door, Ethan approached, thereby closing the distance she had attempted to establish. Lauren instinctively recoiled. He whispered, "You are not comprehending," his voice nearly breaking. "You are flawless. You are the sole individual in this household who is concerned about my well-being." Lauren experienced a shiver that ran down her spine. She was hesitant to turn her gaze away from him, as she was apprehensive about the potential consequences of doing so. Her voice hardened as she demanded, "Ethan, cease this immediately." Lauren was left standing in the dark, trembling, when Ethan abruptly turned and strode out before she could say anything more. He heard a heavy clang as the door closed behind him, but the silence that ensued was even more oppressive. Lauren attempted to calm herself by inhaling deeply, but her pulse continued to pound. She was unable to comprehend the events that had transpired. What was the reason for Ethan's presence there? Also, why did his words convey an undercurrent of something so haunting? She did not slumber for a single moment that evening. Lauren was aware that this was not a matter that could be disregarded. Additionally, she was aware that the expression on Ethan's face tonight indicated that this was only the beginning, regardless of the nature of the situation. Despite the pale sunlight that penetrated the draperies the following morning, the house continued to be enveloped in a dense darkness. Lauren was unable to cease her mental recollection of the events of the previous evening. Ethan's behavior had been peculiar ever since he relocated. However, as of last night was an entirely different experience. He was no longer the reserved, timid young man she had previously believed to be. She was unable to escape the sense of unease that was emanating from his eyes, an obsession that she was unable to identify. The first morning Ethan had moved in, she reflected. Michael had informed her that Ethan required a location to re-establish his life. However, Lauren had a premonition that there was more to the story. Michael had dismissed her inquiries with a brief response when she inquired about these matters. Since his mother's departure, the brothers experienced considerable hardship. I believe that he requires a genuine family. Lauren had consented without hesitation, as she was characterized by her inherent compassion. However, upon reflection, she came to the realization that she was naive about Ethan's background. It was as though Michael had purposefully concealed certain details, as if there were a few things he did not want her to discover. Her insatiable curiosity refused to be suppressed. Lauren resolved to confront Ethan directly after breakfast, after Michael had departed for work. She discovered him in the living room, his eyes fixated on the television screen, despite the fact that it was evident that he was not paying attention to anything on it. Lauren sat in the chair opposite him, endeavoring to maintain a composed demeanor, despite the slight hesitation in her voice. "Is it possible for us to converse briefly, Ethan?" He gazed upward, his piercing blue eyes capturing the morning light while maintaining their distant quality. "How about?" As is his custom, he inquired with a bland and indifferent tone. Lauren meticulously selected her words, biting her lip. "I hope to gain a more comprehensive understanding of you. You are aware that we can feel more at ease living together." Ethan smirked, but it was a hollow smile that did not extend to his eyes. "Am I being understood? I do not believe it is necessary for you to do so." Lauren's patience was strained by the indifference in his voice, however, she was not prepared to surrender. "Michael mentioned that you have experienced a great deal in the company of your mother. Is that accurate?" she inquired gingerly, as if she were treading on thin ice. He was taken aback by that inquiry. His eyes momentarily flickered, and he sat up straighter, as if the mention of his mother had struck a raw nerve. Ethan repeated, his voice lowering. "My mother," he said. "She is not a mother. She is an absolute torment." He observed that his palms had developed into tight fists as he looked down. "She harbored no regard for me. She was exclusively concerned with the males she brought home." Lauren experienced a shiver down her spine. The venom in his tone was unmistakable, despite the fact that she had not anticipated his sudden and bitter disclosure. "Additionally, what about your father?" The tone of her voice softened as she inquired, as if she were negotiating a minefield. The sound was brief and sharp, and Ethan laughed bitterly. "Who is my father? He has forsaken me for an extended period of time. He was solely concerned with his occupation. He did not return to retrieve me after my mother departed. I was compelled to mature independently, master the art of survival." Lauren was at a loss for words. The raw anguish in Ethan's voice was unmistakable. However, there was an additional factor. There was a disconcerting quality to his gaze toward her. His gaze remained on her face for an extended period, which caused her to feel increasingly apprehensive. "So, what was the reason for your decision to relocate to this location?" she inquired, attempting to alleviate the tension by redirecting the conversation in a different direction. Ethan's eyes returned to hers, now more acute and icy. He bluntly stated, "Because of you," and the words struck her like a sudden gust of frigid wind. "You are the sole individual in this residence who regards me as a human being, not as a failure or responsibility." Lauren's esophagus became parched. She desired to respond, to refute it. However, his gaze appeared to remove every layer of her thoughts, leaving her vulnerable. The manner in which he articulated those words was flawed. It appeared as though he was imposing a role on her that she had never consented to. Ethan continued, his voice softening but still bearing a disquieting weight. "I believed that I would be fine as long as you were present. I returned solely because of you." Lauren abruptly stood, the air in the room suddenly becoming too dense to breathe. "I believe it is time to conclude this discussion. If you require any assistance, please do not hesitate to contact Michael or me." Ethan did not utter another word. He observed her with his eyes, tracing her every movement as she exited the room. Lauren left with the distinct impression that she was evacuating, rather than simply departing. She was aware of the reality, despite her desire to believe that the situation was resolved. It was merely the beginning. Lauren was unable to fall asleep that evening, despite the fact that the house was completely silent. Ethan's words from earlier that morning reverberated in her mind with unrelenting intensity. "I returned solely because of you." The statement appeared to be simultaneously a confession, a declaration, and a warning. She was unable to shake the image of his eyes, which pierced through her every thought, a combination of longing and agony. She had attempted to disregard it as a misunderstanding, but she was aware that it had crossed the line in her heart. Michael was working an additional late shift at the hospital, which resulted in her being left alone with Ethan once more. She endeavored to avoid contemplating the matter, assuring herself that nothing would transpire. However, the knot in her stomach persisted. Lauren contemplated securing her bedroom door as she had previously done, but she hesitated. She wanted to avoid fostering an environment of suspicion and expressing her fear. In the end, Ethan was merely a troubled young man, and she, more than anyone else, comprehended the sensation of being abandoned and devoid of affection. Lauren discreetly entered the kitchen at nearly midnight in an attempt to alleviate her tumultuous thoughts by obtaining a glass of water. When she returned to the living room, she was taken aback by the sight of Ethan sitting on the settee in the dim light of the table lamp. She froze in place. He was not utilizing his phone or viewing television. He remained motionless, gazing into the void in front of him. Lauren's voice was low and hesitant as she called Ethan gently. "What are you doing here at this late hour?" His profound, expressive eyes fixed on hers as he gazed upward. He said, his voice low and steady, "I couldn't sleep." "How about you?" Lauren experienced a sense of suffocation as the air in the room became denser. She responded, "I could not either," working to maintain a steady tone. "I suppose I have too much on my mind." Ethan arose gradually, his steps deliberate as he approached her. His shadow was projected across the floor by the faint light from the lamp, giving him an almost spectral appearance. "Is it due to my actions?" he inquired, his tone oscillating between an apology and a challenge. Lauren's pulse was pounding so audibly that she was convinced he could hear it, causing her to freeze. She lied, her eyes darting away from his concentrated gaze. "Of course not. I am simply fatigued." Ethan halted a mere foot away, allowing her to feel the warmth of his breath. "You are not truthful." Although his voice was not particularly loud, it was accompanied by a disconcerting sense of certainty. "Are you frightened of me?" Lauren attempted to respond, but the words became lodged in her larynx. She experienced a sensation of being immobilized, as if she were permanently fixed in place. Ethan's gaze shifted slightly toward her face, as if he were attempting to ingrain her features and details in his memory. His voice was soft and almost tender as he murmured, "I don't want to scare you. I am incapable of ceasing to contemplate you." Lauren instinctively retreated, but Ethan replicated her action, thereby re-establishing the distance. She commanded Ethan to cease, her voice trembling but unwavering. "It is impossible for you to accomplish this." However, he did not cease. As an alternative, he extended his hand, gently brushing his fingers against her arm, a gesture that was both gentle and profoundly unsettling. He stated with a minor crack in his voice, "You are unable to comprehend. You are unaware of the extent of my isolation. You are the sole individual in this household who genuinely cares about me." Lauren continued to retreat, only to experience the frigid, unyielding wall pressing against her spine. She was unable to continue her journey. "Ethan, I am not the person you believe me to be. I am your stepmother and the wife of Michael. We are unable to." However, Ethan interrupted, his irises brimming with desperation. "You are not like the others. You embody all that I have ever desired. You are the sole individual who enables me to feel as though I am of significance." Lauren experienced an inexplicable magnetic force that captured her in his gaze, while simultaneously feeling apprehension rise in her chest. The unmistakable anguish in his words and the raw vulnerability in his voice penetrated a deep, hidden corner of her heart. She came to the realization that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control at that instant. The tension in the room was oppressive, and despite her mind's call to action to cease it, a part of her was captivated by the intensity of Ethan's gaze. She pushed him away with greater force than she had anticipated and fled to her chamber, closing the door behind her and securing it securely. Her heart beat erratically, and her chest heaved with each inhalation. She was aware that she had narrowly evaded breaching a boundary, and this experience frightened her more than Ethan's actions. However, Ethan was not the most disconcerting aspect of the situation. The question that lingered in the back of her mind, the vague, unshakable sensation that was stirring within her. What had she accomplished? Is this genuinely the conclusion? Lauren was unable to fall asleep. Her eyes were fixed on the firmly sealed door as she sat upright in bed, her back pressed against the headboard. The room was rendered more sinister than it had ever been by the faint shadows cast by the dim radiance of the bedside lamp on the walls. She endeavored to dispel the image of Ethan, his trembling voice, his desperate gaze, and his longing. However, it persisted, unceasing and vivid, as if he were still present, standing just beyond the door irrespective of her actions. Lauren's breath caught in her throat as a gentle knock broke the suffocating silence, causing her to freeze. The knock was not particularly noisy, but it was persistent, as if the individual outside was aware of her presence and had no intention of departing. "Lauren?" The voice was deep, subdued, and painfully familiar. Ethan was the individual in question. She said, "Ethan, please leave," her voice quivering slightly in spite of her best efforts to remain composed. She felt her heart pounding violently in her chest. "I am unwilling to engage in conversation with you. You are unable to continue to conceal yourself in this manner." Although his voice was soothing, the manner in which he spoke was unsettlingly resolute. "I merely wish to engage in conversation, I assure you," she retorted. "There is nothing to discuss," and raised her voice in the hopes that it would make him depart. However, she was aware that it would not be as straightforward as she thought. Certainly, the pounding resumed, this time with a greater clamor and force, as if Ethan intended to emphasize that he was not departing. Lauren was in a state of panic as she screamed, "Ethan, if you do not leave, I will immediately contact Michael." Ethan's laughter was bitter and humorless as she reached for her phone, despite the fact that her palms trembled. He spoke with a voice that was abruptly darker, tinged with pain and anger. "Michael. Lauren, he is solely concerned with his profession. He has no regard for you. Do you truly believe that he will rush to your aid? He fails to acknowledge your isolation." Lauren's palm trembled as she grasped her phone, prepared to dial Michael's number. However, she hesitated. A portion of her, which she refrained from acknowledging, was aware that Ethan was not entirely incorrect. Michael was perpetually preoccupied, abandoning her in this expansive, silent residence. However, this did not imply that she would permit Ethan to continue to exceed the boundaries. The doorknob's rattling sound elicited a chilling dread in her. The door was being attempted to be opened by Ethan. She screamed, her voice trembling with panic and anger, "Don't. Ethan, I will contact the authorities if you do not cease immediately." The room was enveloped in a suffocating silence as the clanging ceased. Lauren held her breath, her ears strained to detect any sound. Eventually, she detected the faint sound of deliberate and slow-moving footfall as they retreated down the hallway. She was uncertain as to whether to experience a sense of relief or maintain a state of alertness. However, she was unable to collect her thoughts before a deafening crash reverberated from the downstairs area, followed by heavy, deliberate footsteps and the sound of shattering glass. Lauren's pulse was pounding so violently that she was convinced it might burst as she jumped out of bed. She was aware that Ethan had not departed. Rather, he had discovered an alternative route to re-enter, one that was significantly more perilous and chaotic. She seized her phone and dialed Michael's number. However, no one responded. She was unable to continue waiting. She was obligated to safeguard herself. She discovered the baseball bat that Michael had stored in her closet for emergencies when she opened it. She felt a slight surge of control return to her body as she held it securely in her hands. She cautiously entered the hallway after unlocking the door to her chamber, her bare feet feeling the cold wooden floor. Ethan's voice, which was low and almost melodic, but chillingly unhinged, accompanied the thudding of his footfall below her. "Lauren, did you truly believe that you could remain hidden indefinitely? I am aware that you share my sentiments. The act of feigning must cease." Lauren's palms were slick with sweat as she tightened her grasp on the bat. Slowly, she descended the stairs, focusing on Ethan's silhouette in the dimly illuminated living room, taking each step at a time. He stood with his back to her, holding a bottle of wine in one hand, its contents exhausted. His attention was fixed on the framed bridal photo of Lauren and Michael on the wall in front of him. She issued a command to Ethan, "Stop this immediately," maintaining her voice as steady as she could. "It is imperative that you depart. Right now." Ethan slowly turned to face her, his eyes gleaming with an untamed intensity that she had never before observed. He repeated, "Leave," as a contorted smile formed on his lips. It was unsettling and frigid, not warm or kind. "Do you truly believe that I am capable of accomplishing that? You lack comprehension. Lauren, I am unable to exist without you. All I possess is you." Lauren experienced a chill that ran down her spine. She recognized the expression in his gaze. It was not the expression of a child who was misunderstood or wounded. The appearance of an individual who had completely lost control, an individual who had completely unraveled. Lauren's knuckles turned white as she tightened her grasp on the baseball bat, as if it were her sole source of support. Ethan made a deliberate approach to her, moving slowly but steadily, much like a predator closing in on its prey. Her breath caught in her throat as the air in the room seemed to intensify, weighing her down with an oppressive tension, and she instinctively stepped back. Lauren's voice was trembling, but she spoke with as much resolve as she could summon. "Ethan, please do not do this. You must cease. Michael will arrive home at any moment." He appeared to be even more enraged by the mention of Michael. "Michael?" Lauren's spine was tingled by the acrid, cutting sound of Ethan's laughter. "Lauren, he is never present. He fails to acknowledge your emotions. I consistently execute this action." Lauren was aware that she could not continue to withdraw, as each syllable felt like a vice that was tightening around her. A complete loss of control would occur if she did not act immediately. She commanded Ethan to pay attention, attempting to maintain a composed yet authoritative tone in her voice. "Through this action, you are causing harm to both of us. I am eager to assist you, however I am not inclined to do so in this manner." Ethan briefly hesitated, his irises flickering with a sense of regret or apprehension. However, the dark and unyielding insanity that had consumed him returned almost immediately. He murmured, his voice cracking with desperation, "No. You lack comprehension. I do not require your assistance. I simply require your assistance." Lauren experienced a sensation of dread that threatened to paralyze her. However, she would not permit it. She exclaimed, "You must cease this immediately, Ethan," her voice trembling with renewed energy. "I will contact the authorities if you proceed any further. I assure you that I will." Ethan's body was tense and he froze. His gaze softened for a single agonizing moment, and she caught a glimpse of the boy he used to be, a lost, broken boy who was in quest of something he could not find. Then, as if a switch had been turned, his fists clenched and his eyes hardened in defiance. He stated, "You will not," his voice subdued and challenge-toned. At that precise instant, the suffocating silence was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening, and Michael's voice bellowed, "Lauren, where are you?" Lauren experienced an immediate sense of relief. However, she was acutely aware that the situation was far from resolved. It is possible that the situation could worsen. Ethan's expression was transformed into an unrecognizable form as he abruptly turned toward the sound. Rage, betrayal, and despair are all condensed into a single entity. Ethan's voice rose as he hissed, "He does not belong here. I was abandoned by him. He is not deserving of your affection." Lauren pounced on the opportunity while Ethan was preoccupied and fled toward the door. She shouted, "Michael, be cautious," as she approached the living room entrance. Michael entered the building, his face betraying a sense of bewilderment as he observed Lauren holding a baseball bat and Ethan advancing toward him with purposeful, erratic steps. Lauren violently wielded the bat, striking it down on the coffee table in front of them before Ethan could approach. The room reverberated with the dramatic sound of wood splintering, causing Ethan to halt in his tracks. He stood there, his energy depleted, as if the sound had abruptly brought him back to reality. He was quivering. His gaze fell to the floor in defeat, and his shoulders sagged. Michael promptly approached Lauren's side, firmly resting his palm on her shoulder while maintaining his gaze on Ethan. "What exactly is occurring here?" Michael's voice was a combination of alarm and fury as he demanded. Lauren gazed directly at Ethan while still recovering from her exertions. She stated, "He requires assistance," her voice quivering but unwavering. "We must not permit this to persist." Ethan did not respond. His eyes were wet, but they were not due to contrition. They were the result of the devastating realization that all of the efforts he had made to establish a closer relationship with Lauren had failed. He turned and stepped back without saying a word, his lips moving in a silent motion until he finally murmured, "I'm sorry," before hastily exiting the room into the darkness. Lauren obstructed Michael's progress by firmly grasping his arm. She said, her voice weary but firm, "Let him go. He requires time, and we must engage in conversation." Lauren and Michael conversed about everything for the first time in what seemed like an eternity that evening. Regarding the distance that had developed between them, Michael's absence, and the anguish that Ethan had endured for an extended period. Michael concurred that Ethan required professional assistance, and they resolved to identify a program that could facilitate his recovery upon his return. Lauren was aware that this was not the conclusion. Ethan was still a member of their family, and the events that transpired would not be easily forgotten. However, she was also aware that this was the initial step in the process of mending the fractures, not only in their family but also within herself. One thought persisted in her mind as she gazed out the window at the deserted moonlit street. She maintained the expectation that Ethan would eventually locate his destination, regardless of the duration. Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.